431.
So welcome to Jewish Mysticism Lessons in Tanya, chapter 40. We are on page 470 in the Practical Tanya. And you should have the handout in front of you for chapter, it says 38, but it's supposed to be chapter 40 of Jewish Mysticism Lessons in Tanya. That's a typo. The top wasn't changed.
So look at that.
Hopefully the content was changed. And the Alter Rebbe picks up the conversation from where we left off last week. And I will remind you that this week is the last and final lesson of this series, this 3-week series in which we've been discovering the power of Kavanah. But more importantly, we bundled the two seasons together, where we did the power of action and the power of Kavanah. So our goal for today is going to be basically to wrap up the conversation on Kavanah, which means attentiveness or emphasis or infusing our actions with emotion. And once the Alter Rebbe is done, the Alter Rebbe is going to remind us that the ultimate is, of course, to do the mitzvah. The power of action is much more powerful than the power of Kavanah. But when the power of action is coupled with the power of Kavanah, then you get the best. Yeah, exactly. Then you get the best combination. Well, the sky is not the limit. It goes beyond the sky. It goes up to the spiritual realms. We started that discussion last week. So on that note, the Alter Rebbe reminds us where we were holding last week. Right? So last week in chapter 39, we introduced this concept of that if Torah and mitzvot are not accompanied by kavanah, are not accompanied by intent, then they cannot fly above. Right? That's I think it's the Zohar that has that statement. And the Alter Rebbe explains what is going on here. Ideally, says the Alter Rebbe, a mitzvah is infused with kavanah. What does kavanah mean? Kavanah means intent. Kavanah means attentiveness. Means being present, right? In the 21st century, right? You said you wanted it for 21st century. They would call it being present. You're not just doing a mitzvah, I'm putting on tefillin while I wink at my friend and I'm talking to him and I follow halacha, I make sure not to talk and I make sure not, but I'm busy with other things and my mind is somewhere else. I'm doing a mitzvah, which is supposed to be such a powerful connection with God, and instead I'm somewhere else. Instead I'm focused, laser focused. But what am I focused on? So over the course of the past 2 weeks, the Alter Rebbe has introduced to us that it's not a superficial focus. Oh, I'm saying the words of davening and I'm thinking, yeah, I'm davening about how great Hashem is, so I think about how great Hashem is. No, much more than that. True kavanah is that I've managed to inspire within myself, hopefully not even just a natural love for God and a natural reverence for God, but even a mind-born, right, a consciously activated love for God. Right? So I've taken the time before davening, I've taken the time before I do a mitzvah, I've taken the time before I study Torah to take a moment and meditate about God. Meditate about my relationship with Him, meditate about how much I love Him, how much He loves me, and how much, and until eventually that inspires an actual emotion, which then we go and we do the mitzvah with that emotion. Then that mitzvah, in the words of the Zohar, can fly above. And as we elaborated last week, in very Kabbalistic terms, I feel like we lost half the crowd for half the lesson about the realms, the spiritual realms of Atzilut, Beriah, Yetzirah, and Asiyah.
They can look it up.
And they can look it up, correct. They can also revisit the class if they would like to on YouTube. Yeah. And now's a good time to give a little shout out to Yosef Ilan, who was at home and said he will watch the recording afterwards, and probably Pazia too.
That's correct.
We'll be watching the recording afterwards, so we want to say hello to you from everybody here at the class. And anyone else who's watching, and if I don't know about you, let me know. Shoot me an email. So in this week's chapter, the Alter Rebbe reminds us that this is the authentic attentiveness helps our mitzvot and our to climb to spiritual realms. First of all, from the physical level of Asiyah to the spiritual level of Asiyah, Asiyah being the lowest of all 4 realms. From the Asiyah to go up to Yetzirah, right, where the angels hang out, and to be there. And the Alter Rebbe explains why that is the case. Why that is the case. You see, when we do, meaning, so what happens when we study Torah? What happens when we do a mitzvah and it's not for God? In other words, it's not selfish, right? We're not talking here about the lowest level of someone who started, right? Last week we introduced that there's 3 levels. Either you do it selfishly for yourself, or you do it selflessly for God, right, to connect with God, or this level where it's just sort of dormant, it's just sort of, devoid of any emotion whatsoever, it's just rote. So when you do a mitzvah or you learn Torah, where does it go? Stays
in Asiyah?
So in order to understand where it goes, it's important to remember that every world has in it the 10 sefirot, right? The 10 attributes, which we're all familiar with, right? Chachma, Bina, Da'at, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, all 10 of them we're familiar. But last week the Alter Rebbe touched on this, and just to elaborate a little bit more, those 10, and really any energy that there is, because on an even deeper level, those 10 are really 100, because each one of the 10 is made up of 10. Just thinking now if I should say in brief the sermon that I gave last week at Chabad of Granada Hills, which was very, very powerful, but I think now is not that. So it's very much connected to that point. I guess just to mention in extremely brief, in last week's Torah portion, Moshe Rabbeinu's name is not mentioned. The Parsha of Tetzaveh, it's the only Torah portion in the entire Torah where Moshe Rabbeinu, appropriate Torah portion, obviously in Bereshit his name is not mentioned, right? But from when Moshe enters the picture, it's the only one where his name is not mentioned completely. More importantly, he's referenced many times. In other words, there are many instances in which we're obviously talking about Moshe Rabbeinu, but his name is not mentioned. And the reason for that is because, on a physical level, because Moshe Rabbeinu had this whole spat with God, where he told God, if you're gonna get rid of the Jewish people because of the sin of the golden calf, so then get rid of me, right? And get rid of me, erase me from the whole Torah. And Hashem, even though Hashem didn't destroy the Jewish people, and therefore did not destroy Moshe Rabbeinu, did not erase him from the Torah, but once a tzaddik speaks, something of it has to come true. So in last week's Torah portion, his name is not found. And one of the questions that the commentary asked is, so how is it that is the week, that happens to be the week that's always closely associated with Moshe Rabbeinu's birthday and Yartzeit? Last week, Tuesday, we celebrated Moshe Rabbeinu's Yartzeit, which is the time when we celebrate a person's life, right? And yet that week's Torah portion, and it's always like that, Parshat Tetzaveh is always closest to Moshe Rabbeinu's Yartzeit, and yet it doesn't have Moshe Rabbeinu's name in it. And so the best explanation that I've seen for that is that Tetzaveh has a much deeper connection with Moshe Rabbeinu. In other words, a person's name is only who we are superficially, right? What is a name? A name is something that other people use to call us. And in Parshat Tetzaveh, we get to see a deeper side of Moshe Rabbeinu, not just the side which is his name, which is external for other people, but who he really is. Where do we see that in Parshat Tetzaveh? So we see it in two places. Parshat Tetzaveh is the gematria of the numerical value of the word Tetzaveh is actually 501. Okay? 501. The reason for that is because Moshe Rabbeinu's neshama, well, every person's neshama is made up of 5 elements, right? Nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, yechida, the 5 elements of a person's soul. We've spoken about them before. Each one of those is made up of 10 character traits. Chachma, Bina, Da'at, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yisod, Malchut. And each one of those 10 is made up of 10. So we have a total of 500, right? 5 times 10 times 10. And so who is a person? A person is, of course, the sum total of our entire neshama. But who is the deep core of who a person is? That's what's even beyond that. 501. And that's what Parshat Tetzaveh is. Similarly, we find that Parshat Tetzaveh, the amount of verses, in the amount of Pesukim in Parshat Tetzaveh, is 101. And that's again to show us not just who we are by 100, but who are we on a deeper level. When we exit our comfort zone, when we dig a little deeper, who are we? And that's the deeper level of the person. Anyways, that was very brief. Not for now. That's the end of the parentheses. Back to the point that we were saying here. So every world is made up of 10 sefirot, right? There are 10 attributes of God. And each one of those 10 is coupled by 10 for a total of 400. Regardless of the total, so these sort of make up, so each of these sefirot, or any energy for that matter, godly energy which makes up that spiritual realm, one of the most important things to understand about them is that they are made up of an external and an internal. This ties into a more general conversation which we can have really about the entire world, that everything in this world was created with an external and an internal. From the very, very physical, such as a human being, we have a guf, we have a neshama, right? We have a body, and we have a soul. Angels as well have, even though they don't have physical bodies, but they have one thing that's the energy, and one thing that's the container for the energy, the infrastructure to hold that energy, whatever it is, even though everything over there is spiritual. And the higher up you get, they might be called by other names. For instance, in higher realms, they're called by orot and kelim, which means light, or energy, and kelim means containers or kelim, which is containers or infrastructure to hold that light. So even when it's on a very very simplistic level, without getting too deep into this, because this is not a class on orot and kelim, although a very good class that I did have on that topic comes to mind, but we're going to have to stop going off on tangents, otherwise we'll be here all day. On a very simplistic level, orot and kelim are the external and the internal sort of ways of looking at that world. So, when a Jew does a mitzvah, right, says Rabbi Chaim Vital, that Torah without Kavanah creates Yetzirah angels, and mitzvah without Kavanah creates Asiyah angels. Why specifically angels? Let's read together inside. At the bottom of page 471. The Tanya now cites a source for the idea that Torah devoid of Kavanah rises to the superficial dimension of the worlds where the angels are stationed. So one second, I feel like I didn't fully connect the idea, right? So every world has the superficial, and then there's the internal, right? There's the external, and there's the internal. When a mitzvah is done without Kavanah, it rises to the superficial level of Yetzirah and Asiyah, or where the angels hang out, right? And this is why we find that Rabbi Chaim Vital says, in chapter 2 of Shara Yichudim, in the section entitled Shara Nevuah, that from Torah studied without authentic intent, angels are created in the world of Yetzirah. And for practical mitzvahs observed without authentic intent, angels are created in the lower world of Asiyah. Mitzvahs involving action, when devoid of Kavanah, have little light and energy of their own, so they cannot rise to Yetzirah, right? So Torah without Kavanah is more powerful than mitzvah without Kavanah. Right? It's more spiritual. Now, as we noted above, angels inhabit the superficial dimension of each world. So Rabbi Chaim Vital's statement that Torah studied without authentic intent creates angels indicates that the Torah rises to the superficial dimension of the world and not to the sphere. So it doesn't actually get to the internal level of those worlds, which is the actual 10 attributes. Right? So each one of those 10 attributes has its keli. It has its counterpart in the container section of the world, in the external section of the world, or the superficial element of the world. I know we've gotten very Kabbalistic here. Give me just a moment, or just another minute or two, and then we'll get back to the practical. But we see that Torah study or a mitzvah devoid of Kavanah does at least enjoy some level of spiritual ascent, and it rises to the level of the angels. Right? This is why, for those who recall, last week or 2 weeks ago we said, don't worry about it. Even when you do a mitzvah, even if it's done without intent, at the very least, you're no worse off than the angels, right? Why? Because this level, the superficial level of the world, is where the angels hang out. So when we do Torah mitzvah without intent, at least we get to that level.
Good.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, if I only can memorize that.
Okay, now, of course, anytime the Alter Rebbe introduces this concept, he wants to remind us that this is only when we study Torah for no purpose at all. In other words, there's no kavanah, there's no infusion of emotion into that Torah and mitzvot. However, there's also no selfish intent. When there is a selfish intent, right? So when a person studies Torah just because he wants the honor of being a Talmid Chacham, right? He wants the honor of being a Torah scholar. He wants the honor of being a rabbi. He wants it like that he could simply pay the bills. He's like, I think I could be a good rabbi, so I'm just going to study Torah, like that I could be a rabbi, and then I'll be able to pay the bills. Which is completely not for the real reason why we study Torah, right? Or even if a person chooses to study Torah in order to gain for his own personal, without even, honor or something else that he gets, to gain in his own personal life. So he's not just bypassing the whole reason why Torah is there. In other words, he's not just passing up an opportunity. When somebody does it neutrally, without any intent, not for the good, not for the bad, so it's silly. He's passing up on an amazing opportunity to connect with Hashem. He's passing up on an amazing opportunity to rise above the physical realm and transcend and become one with God. However, he's not doing anything negative. When a person studies Torah with selfish intent, so then that Torah now becomes exiled in the forces of Kalipa. And that's why the answer to the question, where does our Torah and mitzvot go when we don't have proper kavanah, is twofold. If it's done without any kavanah, so then it at least rises to asiyah and yitzira on the superficial level, like with the angels. Nothing major. But when we do it, when we study Torah or we do mitzvot, and there's actually a selfish intent, then it gets locked in the forces of Kalipa. Not only does it not go into the internal levels of the spiritual realms and rise up above there, but it doesn't even go above this physical asiyah, which is known as the world in which the Kalipot they rule down here, right? Which is why this world is a physical world primarily, right? Because spirituality is not predominant here. So then the Torah mitzvah remains down here in the forces of Kalipa, and it would take a serious teshuvah on the part of the person doing so in order to redeem both himself and the Torah and mitzvah that he did together with him, right?
That's too bad.
Why?
1 second. Instead of focusing on the too bad, let's focus on the flip side. So, 2 proofs that the Alter Rebbe brings to this concept, and really to showing us how good of a job we can do, should we choose to do the right thing here. So the Alter Rebbe brings first from the Zohar. It's actually interesting. There's a famous verse in Exiliastes, in Kohelet. In Perek number 1, in chapter 1, in verse 3. It says as follows. It says, Ma yitron la'adam b'chol amalo sheyamol tachat hashamesh. What gain is there for man in all that he toils, in all the toil that he toils under the sun? And the verse continues on to say, Ba'amalo shel olam in yitron, that in the toil that a person toils of the physical world, we work so hard at our business, etc., there is no benefit to be had. But Ba'amalo shel Torah, in the toil that we toil in the Torah, there is yitron, there is benefit to be had. It's interesting. They tell the story of a man. I don't know if it's a true story, if it's just to bring out a point, if it's an analogy to bring out a point. They tell the story of a man who passed on from this world, a wealthy man, who was a philanthropist, passed on from this world, and so his children go, they know exactly where the envelope is, last will and testament, they open it up. What they didn't know is that inside this envelope there are 2 envelopes. And one of them says, open the day I pass from this world. My soul, the day that my soul leaves my body, I want you to open this envelope. And the second envelope says, open 30 days after my funeral. So they open the first one right away. They're still shocked. Their father just passed, etc. And there's a simple letter in there. It says, Dear family and friends, if you've opened this letter, it means that I have now passed from this world. I have just one request. Before you bury me, there is this one pair of socks that I had a very special attachment to. Whatever it is. I don't know if it's a pair of socks that he met his wife in, a pair of socks that he wore on a certain day of his life, whatever it is. I would like to be buried wearing that pair of socks. Children looking at it like it's a strange request. But if our father's last dying wish, let's attempt to do it. So when they sit down for their meeting with the Chevra Kadisha, with the Holy Burial Society, they tell them, listen, our father said whatever they're going through it, all the laws of Judaism, whatever, the tombstone is going to cost you this much, and he actually prepaid, and everything's taken care of. And the burial plot, and the Kaddish, and everything, they're going through all the different laws. And when the children mention, there's just this one thing, when we bury him, we want to make sure he's buried in these socks. So all of a sudden the Chevra Kadisha says, what are we going to do? According to Jewish law, a person is supposed to be buried only in tachrichim, only in burial shrouds, white burial shrouds. And every single Jew is buried exactly the same way.
Burial what?
Burial shrouds. It's like these plain, simple white clothing.
But no shoes.
The clothing possibly covers the feet, I don't know. But you're not supposed to be wearing anything else. In fact, if the person has a piercing, they take it out. If the person has anything else inside their body, they take it out. And they clean the body, it's a whole process. They say, but this is what our father requested. So he said, but wasn't your father a religious man? Yes, he was a very religious person. He for sure would want to do everything in accordance with Torah and Jewish law. Back and forth, till they finally decided, okay, listen, our father probably didn't know. Had he known this law, there's no way he ever would have requested burying the socks. And so they decided, you know what, we're going to have to bury him without the socks. And they figured something else out. They put the socks in some other thing and put it next to where he was buried, whatever it was. They figured it out. Fine. 30 days go by, and they open up the second will. And this one is a whole fat stack of papers. On the front page is a letter from their father. It says, if you're opening this letter, it means that I've already taught you the most valuable lesson you will ever be able to be taught in your life. After 120 years, when your soul leaves your body, you can't take anything with you, even your socks.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, now that I've told you that lesson, we can start to talk about my estates and my finances and figure out, like, as long as you approach to it, as you realize, after you pass out from this world, you can't take anything with you. What can a person take with them? So the Talmud, in right, so in Ecclesiastes it says, "Ba'amalo shel olam," and all the toil that we do in this world, we're so busy chasing a career, and we should be able to support ourselves. We should be able to have a nice house and a nice car and all these different things. So in Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, Shlomo Melech, the wisest of all men, tells us what? Ein yitron. There's no benefit in anything that you do in this world. But ba'amalo shel Torah, if you take those finances and you put them towards the study of Torah, or if you yourself go and study Torah, right? So then, yesh yitron, right? To that there is benefit, says Shlomo Melech, the wisest of all men, King Solomon. This is why we find that in the Talmud, in Pesachim, it says, Ashri mi, Shebalach, the Talmud is discussing, when people come up to the world to come after 120 years. It says, Ashri mi, Shebalach, lucky is he, happy is the man who comes here to heaven, and he has his learning in his hand. All of his learning is in his hand. What does this mean to say? These two verses, or these two quotes, are referencing and proving to us this point of the fact that our Torah mitzvah has to be done with Kavanah. As the Zohar has a very interesting spin on the verse. The Zohar says like this: instead of reading it, there is no, right? What was the verse again? No, not that one. Here. The Zohar states, commenting on the verse, what gain is there for man, right? Ma yitron le'adam sheyamo tachat hashamash. What gain is there for man? What benefit is there for man in all the toil that he does under the sun? So the Zohar translates like this. He says, toil without gain includes even toiling in Torah, if he does it for the sake of bringing honor to himself. And then it will remain, right? Ma yitron le'adam. What sort of gain will you have if it remains under the sun? Tachat hashamash. You needed to go above that. You needed to ascend everywhere to go up, says the Zohar. Ma yitron le'adam b'chol amalo asher yamol tachat hashamash. If all of your, right, let's assume that all of your toiling is in Torah. Everything you're busy working on in life is in Torah. But if your Torah is not infused with the benefit of Kavanah, then it remains tachat hashamash, under the sun. And that's why, what does the Talmud say? He comes up to heaven, and his Torah comes up to heaven with him. Why? Because it's infused with Kavanah.
I like this.
I liked it too. That's why I wanted to share it.
It's like a catalyst.
Of course, precisely. Kavanah is exactly that. It's like a catalyst. It's like you're going up to heaven anyways, but you're wearing a rocket, a jetpack on your back, 100%.
So it stays with him. It doesn't go up while he's praying.
What was
It
that?
doesn't stay under the sun, it goes above the sun.
Above the sun. But when one passes, they take all that with them?
100%. There is a story that I probably shouldn't be sharing because the recording is on, but I'll share it anyways. And if I get a chance, I'll censor it afterwards. If not, then it'll be a good sign. There was a Chabad rabbi who, after a particular non-Chabad rabbi passed on from this world, I guess he was after L'chaim, at a Fabrengen. He made a statement like, oh, that rabbi, now that he's up in heaven, he wasn't a chassid. He is jealous of the smallest, lowest student in Tomchei Tmimim, in the Chabad yeshiva. And this leaked out to the public, and people got very, very offended. I understand you don't believe with his school of thought, this school of thought, that school of thought. He says, but how could you say that? This man, even if you don't agree with him, he was a great rabbi. He studied a lot of Torah in his life. How can he be jealous now up in heaven, after all the Torah that he studied and all the beautiful things that he did in his life? He's jealous just because he didn't learn Chassidus, so he's jealous of this little boy. And the Rebbe got involved. And the Rebbe gave an explanation. The Rebbe said, yes, the honest truth is that he's right. You see, what happens in Olam Haba? What happens in the world to come? Lucky is the person who gets to come to the world to come, and he has his learning in his hand. Why is it so important that our learning be in our hand? Because in the world to come, what do we spend our time doing? Learning Torah.
Stop.
So whatever we studied in Torah down here in this world, we study on a deeper level. And even deeper, and even deeper. And our neshama goes deeper and deeper until it finally understands it the way God understands it. Right? Or it never reaches that stage, but it's always getting closer and closer. But it can't study anything new. Because that's what your physical life was for. Right? To do whatever you can do in this world. So he says, listen, this rabbi, as respectful as he was, and as, much Torah has learned in his life, because he never learned Chassidus, he's starting on a very superficial level. So he'll go deeper and deeper and deeper in that, but he's jealous of even the smallest child in Tumfat Mimim, who learned even just a little bit of Chassidus, which is the deeper element of Torah. Why? Because when that child comes up, even if he learns no more Torah throughout his life, he will take that one little piece of Chassidus, which is already super deep about God, and learn it deeper and deeper and deeper on a more and more spiritual level. Right? So yes, it's like a jetpack. When we come up above and we've learned Chassidus, we've learned Torah, and we then get to experience that in more and more and more of a godly way, it's an unbelievable experience.
Do they have a Tanya or Torah written in a more simplistic way, like Tanya for the Danis? I've heard they have some.
This Tanya is a very powerful, is a very, simplistically written. It's the practical Tanya.
There are lessons in Tanya, I think.
Lessons in Tanya is a little bit deeper than this.
A little bit.
Yeah, but that's a little deeper than this.
Is it?
That's the white ones that we have over there on the shelf.
Oh, yeah.
Anyways, but to get back to the lesson, so now the problem is, so this is all beautiful, right? You said you liked it. It's a beautiful way the whole thing comes together. But there's one challenge. We've substituted words, right? We used the word Torah, and everybody here didn't tell me anything when I said, the Torah does go above, it doesn't go above, it stays down here in the physical world, it stays in the klippa, it goes up to the spiritual realms. The problem is, if we substitute the words back, we recognize that Torah is what? Torah is essentially just God's wisdom. Torah, as the Alter explained all the way back in chapter 5, is essentially God himself. Because God and his wisdom are not two separate things like by us. There's not the person and the person who knows and the thing that he knows, but hu amad hu yadu yadeh, it's all exactly the same thing. So you're telling me that God is limited? And based on whether I do it with Kavanah or I don't do it with Kavanah, Torah, which is God's wisdom, will or will not climb in spiritual realms? How does that work? Right? So in order to do this, the Alter Rebbe reminds us that there are really two perspectives here. You're right. If you look from a spiritual world perspective, if you look from God's perspective, God is never limited. And the Torah, from a spiritual perspective, is actually always one with God. But there's a physical world perspective. And that physical world perspective blocks that. And that's our perspective as human beings. And that perspective, we'll call it the top-down perspective, or the down-up perspective, right? Or the bottom-up perspective. They're different in two ways. And this will be familiar to you from last week. They're different in quantity, and they're different in quality. And that's because the tzimtzum, the diminishment that there was twofold. There was the tzimtzum and there was the hester panim. Right? And not to get all bogged down by that conversation again from last week. But from a spiritual top-down perspective, the diminishment is very, very minimal. Or the diminishment exists, doesn't even really exist. The light is powerful, and the light is more, right? And it's only when we look from our bottom-up perspective that we have this dark filter and veil and diminishments and tzimtzum and whatever words you want to use that distract us from seeing the godliness in Torah. And this, my friends, instead of it being the biggest challenge, actually proves the most of what Kavanah does. You see, that's what Kavanah does. Right? Remember the dual, the non-dual perspective of looking at the world? What Kavanah does is, what is Kavanah? Right? Let's boil it down again, very simply. What is Kavanah? Kavanah means instead of me just coming and doing a mitzvah, of doing the physical act, I light the candles, I make with my hand. Instead of me just doing the physical act, I've infused it with meaning. What does infusing it with meaning mean? It means I've given birth to a love, to a reverence for God, which fuels this mitzvah. What does that mean? Essentially what I do is I take the time to burst the bubble. I take the time to say, I know that there's a bottom-up perspective, in which there's less quality of light, there's less quantity of light, and this mitzvah could be the most simplistic physical thing in the world. But I want to choose to take time out of my day to meditate on God and to burst the bubble to me, mentally, and slowly through the mentally that I burst the bubble. I burst the bubble emotionally, right? And even though usually I say to myself, how can I love or fear a God that has nothing to do with me, right? All of a sudden it becomes, no. I love God in such a physical way, and with my physical body, my physical heart, I managed to love God. I managed to take the whole physical facade, not break it, pop it, use it and transform it to be a catalyst that pushes forward, right? Which, as you will recall, is the whole purpose of creation, to burst this bubble, and to do the mitzvah, to do with kavanah. And doing with kavanah essentially is what is saying, I'm going to stop having that bottom-up perspective, and I'm going to have that top-down perspective, the spiritual realm perspective. The last few bullet points summarize it the most, summarize it best. Torah is godly and spiritual, completely, and has nothing to do with us. But it has been filtered and veiled into material, intellect, and physical words, right? Think about it. Torah is what? It's God's wisdom, it's God Himself. But it's God the way He's chosen to take it and quantitatively and qualitatively bring it down in such a way that it looks like physical words and physical intellect. There are so many people who choose to study Torah and they don't even realize that it's godliness. Right? In the times of Hanukkah, this was most evident. They said, we don't mind that you study Torah. We too study intellect, right? We love to be intellectual. We're Greeks. We're Assyrian Greeks. We have all these philosophies. We're great. We love philosophy. Sure. Just this kavanah that you've ascribed to it. By the way, we don't use that word when we talk about the Hanukkah story, but that's essentially what it is. This reverence that you've ascribed to it. The fact that when you study Torah, you study it with such a love for God. Stop. Remove the godliness from it. That's what the Hanukkah, right? That's what the Assyrian Greeks wanted from the Jewish people in the times of Hanukkah. And that's what our job is not to do. Right? Even though the Torah is enclosed and filtered and veiled in these physical words, and it's in a book, and it's intellectual, and it's moral, and it's philosophical. When we do Torah and Mitzvah with Kavanah, we pierce that darkness and allow it to soar by realizing the true godly intent that there is in that Torah and Mitzvah. And in this manner, they are redeemed and allowed to return to their source of godliness. And all of a sudden, the Torah becomes what it really is. The spiritual realms of Yetzirah and Asiyah. And when Mashiach comes, by the way, right? This is not, like we always say, this is all part of the process to create dira batachtonim, to create a physical, a dwelling place for Hashem down here at dira, right? When that is, achieved, what is that? Mashiach. When Mashiach comes, this won't be a novel concept. Oh, you pierce the darkness and you realize that Torah is really a spiritual, is really a godly. No, it'll be natural. Every person will see it as that. When we'll access the Torah right away, it'll be Kavanah will not be a challenge when Mashiach comes, is one way of putting it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
How come Kavanah will not be a challenge?
Because when Mashiach comes, this process of piercing the darkness will not be a novel. It'll be possible in the physical realm as well. You'll be able to just say, of course, this book is godliness. The divide between the physical and the spiritual won't exist anymore.
Mm-hmm.
We will feel God more. We'll be more in tune with Him all the time.
In the third section, so now we're on page 481. Now, Tanya is going to offer his concluding thoughts on Kavanah, and he's going to lay the groundwork for the next series that we're going to do, even though the Alter Rebbe doesn't set it up that way, right? But Rabbi Miller sets it up that way. And essentially, that's what the Alter Rebbe is doing. He's setting up the groundwork now, the foundation for what we're going to discuss over the next 10 weeks. We're going to take a 1 week break, and then for 10 weeks we're going to discuss. For 10 weeks we're going to talk about reverence and love, ahava and yira'ah. Two things that, by the way, are very simple mitzvot. I mean, simple is the wrong word, but they're just mitzvot, like all the, right? On a simple level, they're mitzvot, just like every one of the 613 mitzvot. But on the other hand, they are the power and the fuel for every single mitzvah in the Torah. Right? As we've already learned before, love, developing a love for God, is the inspiration behind every single positive commandment that there is in the Torah. Every time we talk about this, we always bring the example of a spousal relationship, right? Why do I do things for my spouse? Because I love my spouse. Why do I choose not to do certain things for my spouse? Right? My spouse doesn't like that I eat in this way, or that I do look in this way, or I talk in this way, or I treat her in this way. Because I revere my spouse, not because I love her. There's love, and then there's reverence. Right? It's like this give and take relationship. And with God we have the same thing. These two emotions are very, very important. And this is found at its source in Yeshaya. In Nevuas Yeshaya, in the prophecy of Yeshaya, he says that he saw them, that they were flying with two. Right? The Zohar describes that if one does not keep the Torah, right, then that if one does not keep the Torah mitzvot with reverence and love, then he is like chicks that are unable to fly. Because reverence and love are the two wings with which all of our mitzvot fly above. We've referenced this concept before. And this is why the Alter Rebbe is going to spend so much time talking about what is a true love, and what is a true fear or reverence of God. And he's going to talk about it from lots of different angles over the next 10 weeks. And just to summarize what the role that these two emotions play, it's this interesting, tag team. On the one hand, for 3 weeks we spoke about the power of action. Oh, those emotions you talk about, they're very nice, but they're secondary to actions. Because doing an action, that's the most important thing. Actually studying the Torah, actually praying, actually doing the mitzvah, that's the most important things. But then we spent 3 weeks talking about, really? You're just going to study Torah? You're just going to pray? You're just going to do it, but you're not going to infuse it with Kavanah? You're not going to develop emotion that's going to drive it? It's worthless. Right? So in order to summarize the two and to fuse them, to understand how the two work together, the Alter Rebbe reminds us that Ava and Yira'ah, reverence and love, are the two wings without which our Torah mitzvah will never fly above. However, they're just wings. What are wings? Right? If a bird doesn't have wings, can they not live? Of course they can live. That's not the ikr, that's not the main property, that's not the primary function of the bird, the flying. Right? The bird will still be able to survive, eat, drink, sleep, do everything else. It just cannot fly. However, those wings allow it to soar to heights that are way beyond. This is why the Zohar compares Av and Yira'ah to wings. This is why in Yeshaya they're compared to wings. Why? Because reverence and love are the wings that without which the Torah and the mitzvah cannot fly above. Are the Torah mitzvah worthless without it? No. But without them, they cannot fly up to the spiritual realms. Now, it's important to remember that even though we talk about Av and Yira'ah, reverence and love, as being the wings and the emotions that drive everything, and they're only secondary, but they are also mitzvot, right? To love God and to fear God, to love God and to revere God are two of the 613 mitzvot. And that's because even though reverence and love are means to an end, right? The whole purpose of it is to inspire the mitzvot, right? Imagine if somebody says, I love God, but I don't want to put on tefillin for God. How silly, right? That's like the Alter Rebbe compares it to somebody who comes to a stream, he sees rushing water, he walks all the way to the stream, and he stands in front of the stream and he goes, I'm thirsty! I'm so thirsty! Right? Similarly, if somebody inspires themselves with a love for God, they're like, I love God, I've managed to meditate, and I figured out such a burning, passionate desire for God, I wish that I could just connect with God. And if he doesn't do a mitzvah, then he doesn't study Torah, right? He's lost the whole point. So even though Av and Yira'ah are usually means to an end, and we say that just loving God without anything else, you've dropped the whole ball, right? The Alter Rebbe reminds us that there is a very high level. Not one that supersedes the mitzvot, but one that in addition to the love inspiring a mitzvah, the love can also just be a love for God. I have such an intense desire to just be one with God, to just enjoy the presence of God. But unless you reach that stage, and until we reach that stage, to just inspire ourselves with a love for God and not allow that emotion to drive a mitzvah, to drive Torah learning Yisod. And with this we'll conclude Jewish Mysticism and Lessons in Tanya, chapter 40, in which we discussed the power of Kavanah and finally concluded the power of Kavanah. Over the past 3 weeks, we've really gained insight into it. But we've also set the stage for the next 10-week season, which we're going to have. For 10 weeks, we're going to actually dissect what is a true love for God, what is a true reverence for God, and how do the two play as a tag team that one without the other and the other without the other don't work. Please join us for the next 10-week series of Jewish Mysticism Lessons in Tanya, titled Reverence and Love.